When I was interviewing here, earnestly hoping to become your rector, after being peppered with questions, some of which were expected and some of which were not, at last I was asked if I had any questions I'd like to ask the search committee. This was a question I was expecting, and I asked, what is something about Gloucester that only someone who lives here would know about? I think it was Paul McGeary who answered, Dogtown. I'd already learned a little bit about Dogtown in my preliminary research, but I was intrigued that a representative of a city defined by its busy coast and waterways would point to her silent interior as emblematic of the authentic local experience. I made a very brief visit to Dogtown before I went home, and I didn't see what was so special about it. But, as Captain John Smith once wrote, how much they err that think everyone which has been at Virginia understands or knows what Virginia is. In the year and a half that I've been living in Gloucester, I've been back to Dogtown many times. Sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend. I've gotten to know the basics of the main trails and some of the best-known sites, the Whale's Jaw and, of course, Peter's Pulpit, and even a little bit of the history. During my most recent visit, my friend and I were curious to visit a feature named on the map as the Boardwalk. We reached the site and were surprised to find not a few planks laid down to ease passage over swampy terrain, but a rough stone wall set in a valley, forming a narrow footbridge about the width of this church. We can only speculate as to why people had obviously gone to a lot of trouble to build this thing, what they were trying to accomplish, and how it acquired its misleading name. Although maybe some of you here know some of the answers to those questions. Well, instead of the wilds of Dogtown, Mary Magdalene set out for a modest suburban garden. She was, quite literally, in the dark. But more than that, she set out to find something very simple, something she understood only too well, but instead discovered something much more impressive, something that defies human understanding. She expected to encounter a dead man. Instead, she met the living God. The empty tomb alone would have been enough of a surprise, enough evidence and provocation for faith and proclamation. Encountering angels would have been enough, their testimony more than sufficient to overcome skepticism and restore faith. But Jesus wants more for us to believe. Jesus wants more for us than just to believe in his resurrection, as beneficial as such a belief is to us. Jesus wants to meet us in his resurrection. Just as he always had, Jesus wants an active, living, transformational relationship with us, not our passive assent to a body of doctrine. It doesn't mean that correct doctrine is unimportant. Jesus' followers and even his enemies called him teacher, so I should make that clear. John's Gospel in particular, which had up until this point emphasized Jesus' divinity so thoroughly, now goes out of its way to emphasize his humanity in his tangible bodily resurrection. The risen Christ can be felt not just with human hearts, but with human hands. He doesn't just speak, he eats and even cooks breakfast. But even this is part of his instruction for us. Jesus is teaching us about himself and about us. He shows us that we too will be raised, not as ephemeral spirits, but as whole people who can live and relate the only way we can, in our bodies. Flesh was good enough for God to take on in the first place, precious enough that its death could overthrow death and liberate the captives of hell. If Jesus had not returned in the flesh, it would mean that a part of him was still dead, and that his victory was incomplete, and death still got a say in the ways of God. The God I know was not about to let that happen. Like a massive stone bridge wall appearing where one expected to find a few soggy planks of wood, Jesus' resurrected body defies our expectations by being bigger and better, more substantial, incorruptible, no longer bound by the limitations of the world. So too will our bodies be. Until then, we would do well to follow in the racing footsteps of Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. Jesus told her to let go of him, not because he didn't love her, but because he was calling her to carry out a mission of proclamation, to tell their mutual friends what had happened and what would happen next. The fact that Jesus asked Mary to tell the guys and not the other way around shows us that as much as he loved them, Jesus knew whom he needed to count on to get the job done. The guys might well have gotten into an argument over who saw Jesus first, and the foot race between Peter and John suggests that's exactly what happened. But Mary Magdalene understood what was really important, proclaiming, "I have seen the Lord." Do celebrate today, for God has done so much that is worthy of celebration. But also participate in the relationship that Jesus urgently invites us into with his resurrection. Expect to find Jesus in unexpected places, both inside and outside, both in clamor and in stillness, and proclaim his resurrection, both with your lips and with your lives. For we no longer need to fear anything, for our ancient enemies have been vanquished. We have seen the Lord, and he dwells in us, and we in him. So choose to glorify him. Let your proclamation be bold, and your joy complete. Amen.
Amen.